Hi, my name is Kimberly Grace, and today I'm going to read to you an excerpt from my book, A Pause in Life Can Lead to Love. This is a book that I self-published, and it is available for purchase online on Amazon and other online retailers. Today I'm going to read you the prologue. Let's begin. Jude hurried from her car to get out of the heavy rain and under the safety of her front awning while clutching two huge bags of groceries to her chest. She desperately tried in vain to wipe the water droplets out of her eyes, but came narrowly close to losing the grip she had on one of the paper bags. Instead, she did an odd-looking dance in order to insert the key into the doorknob, and awkwardly shifted everything to her left hip to open the door. Once inside, she set the groceries down on the kitchen countertop and let out a huge sigh of relief. Jude was elated that she had accomplished her mission without dropping a single item. After wringing out her hair and changing her clothes into some comfy sweats, Jude took inventory one more time. Everything had to be perfect for tonight, and she planned to pull out all the stops. Her boyfriend of 10 years was coming over for dinner, and Jude knew he was going to ask her an important question. Scott had been dropping hints all week, and Jude's heart pounded with excitement. Tonight I will be asked to be Mrs. Scott Green. I cannot wait. Jude danced around the kitchen humming the Here Comes the Bride song and twirled her chef apron around as though it were her wedding dress. She was just about to stick the chicken into the oven when her doorbell rang. Now who could that be? Scott isn't due to arrive for another 4 hours. I hope it's not a verbose salesman, as I do not have a minute to spare in preparation for the most important dinner of my life. Jude quickly placed the main course into the oven and set the timer. She then ran to her front door and hastily took off her apron as the stranger rang the doorbell 2 more times in rapid succession. Breathless, Jude swung open the door forcefully and prepared to let into the rude person standing before her. However, she was surprised to find Scott standing there with his finger just inches from the doorbell, ready to ring it again. Scott, what are you doing here? I thought that you were coming over at 7 o'clock. I'm sorry I look like a mess, but I was in the middle of preparing our meal. Without a word, Scott smiled and pushed his way past Jude to walk into her apartment. He took off his shoes and handed Jude his soaking wet hat and jacket. A pool of water began to form on Jude's freshly cleaned floor. She hung them up and followed Scott into the living room, where he made himself right at home. He was already halfway through setting up his laptop and portable workstation before he spoke. The internet and phone lines are down at work. I would have headed up to the main office in New York, but with rush hour, I would not have made it in time for my very important client meeting in an hour. Luckily, Point Pleasant is very close to Tom's River. I knew you would understand, darling. Oh, well, yes, of course. Glad I can help. Jude walked over to Scott, hoping that he would give her a kiss, hello, but instead pointed to his earpiece, signaling that he was already on a phone call. She returned to the kitchen dejectedly and poured Scott his favorite drink, water with 1 lemon slice and 1 lime slice. Jude tried to quietly set it down next to him, but Scott was engrossed in the very animated conversation and knocked the glass over. Scott screamed and jumped up quickly to retrieve a stack of papers that were near the spill. Jude tried to sop up the mess of her apron, but it was no use as the liquid trickled down her couch and onto her carpet. Thank goodness it was only water, Jude thought, and sighed in relief. She was startled when Scott reached down and pulled her up to face him. He held her wrist tightly, but not enough to hurt her. Mr. Roberts, I am terribly sorry, but may I please put you on a brief hold? I promise to return momentarily with no further interruptions. Scott muted his earpiece, and a menacing scowl began to transform his normally handsome face. Why did you do that, Jude? You almost ruined my legal research. You could have cost me this case. Scott was furious, and Jude didn't know what to say. She had seen his temper flare a couple of times before, but he had never grabbed her like this. She started to move away from him, but he wouldn't release her. Jude tried to blink away the tears that were forming in the corner of her eyes. I'm sorry, Scott. I was just trying to be helpful. Well, maybe you should think about the consequences of what you deem to be helpful. Helping is most certainly not destroying my notes and costing my firm money. I thought you understood that when I am working, you should leave me alone. You got it? Jude nodded her head slowly and looked down at her feet. Before either one could say anything else on the matter, Scott returned to his very important phone call, and the smell of burnt food began to fill the air. Jude sprinted for the fire extinguisher when she saw the flames inside the oven and rapidly put out the fire. The flames were put out fast, but it was too late to stop the room from filling up with smoke, and the fire alarm from blaring. Scott angrily moved his workstation upstairs into Jude's bedroom. Jude sank to the floor and sobbed. Her perfect romantic dinner was ruined, and her hopefully soon-to-be fiancé was holed up in her room mad at her. After crying for a little while, Jude got up and splashed cold water on her face to hide the tear streaks and dull the puffiness around her eyes. She redid her makeup and straightened her disheveled hair, and then went searching for her binder of takeout menus. She thumbed through the pages until she found the perfect restaurant to order from for the replacement meal. Scott had recently taken her to the Shipwreck Grill, and it was the only place they had eaten at where he didn't complain about the food, so she knew he would really like it. The grilled filet mignon and scallops will surely put this dinner back on the right track, she thought. After the order was placed and 2 days' wages and tips from Jude's waitressing job were spent, she hurried to clean up the mess in the kitchen. Jude tiptoed up the stairs carefully to make sure none of the floorboards creaked, and went into her spare bedroom. Thankfully, she had already put her dress for the evening in that room earlier on the back of the door. She ran her fingers through the soft ruffles of the bottom of her favorite gown. It had a small, shimmering sparkle of glitter on the bodice. Not overly flashy, but enough glint to catch anyone's eye. The dress was an elegant shade of turquoise, and reminded Jude of ocean waves. She felt a sense of renewed calm, and refocused her thoughts back on her mission. Jude was growing impatient, waiting for Scott to pop the question, and if he didn't do it tonight, then she wasn't quite sure what she would do about it. There was a lot riding on this meal, and Jude was determined to make her dreams come true. They would get married on the beach and buy a cottage not far from the water's edge. They would have 2 kids and grow old together, taking many walks hand in hand along the beach. Her eyes brimmed with happiness at the thought, and she stifled a small giddy squeal of excitement. Jude meticulously applied another layer of makeup and put her hair up in a fancy updo twist. Once she was fully satisfied with how she looked, she carefully unzipped her dress and stepped into it. She twirled around a few times and watched its symmetrical shape magically float up and down as she made each spin. Jude glanced at the time, and it was getting very close to showtime. She slipped into her highest heels and quickly, but carefully, made her way back down the steps, tiptoeing again to make sure she didn't disturb Scott. As soon as her feet reached the last step, the doorbell rang. The food had arrived, and Jude moved faster to the door once she was back on the solid main floor. Jude prayed that Scott didn't hear the doorbell and tried to rush the delivery man along, but the young lad insisted on repeating Jude's order back to her. "Thank you, but I'm sure it is all here. Please, can you hurry up? This is a surprise dinner." The man stopped talking mid-sentence and stared at Jude dumbfounded. Clearly he was a new delivery man and wanted to make sure he followed the restaurant's exact instructions and procedures. Jude sighed and said, "Okay, fine. Yes, please continue. The filet mignon and..." The young man smiled and proudly went back to reading the rest of the order out loud. Once he was finished, Jude handed him a 20, and the delivery man smiled even more. He walked away beaming with the biggest triumphant grin Jude had ever seen. Jude shook her head gently and laughed with amusement at his delight in her generous tip. She closed the door and heard Scott pacing around upstairs. "Uh-oh, I have to move fast." Jude raced to her dining room table and began serving the food onto the plates she had diligently laid out earlier. She hurried to her garage and dumped the takeout containers into her trash receptacle. Then she lit the 2 white candles on the table and took one more look at herself in the mirror to fix the few loose flyaway hairs. She put their favorite Beatles album on her record player. Scott liked to tease Jude for having what he deemed to be an old, useless relic, but Jude didn't mind the slight, scratchy raspiness that it made sometimes. To her, the sound only created more character and dimension to the melody. Besides, the family heirloom was priceless to Jude. It had been their grandmother's, and then it belonged to her father. Hearing it play the songs that her family had grown up listening to brought back so many wonderful memories. The sudden wave of emotions hit her hard, and she dabbed away a few falling tears. Suddenly, Scott appeared in the doorway, but his eyes were glued to his phone as he typed away furiously. Without even glancing up, he said, "Dinner is going to be late because my boss just scheduled an important meeting that I must be present for. Can you order some sushi to replace the burnt meal you made?" Jude stared at him aghast. Does he not smell all this wonderful food? How can he not see all the trouble I went through to plan the perfect meal for us? Scott? What is it, Jude? Can't you see I'm very busy? If you don't want sushi, then make yourself a salad or something. You did say you were trying to lose weight anyway. Jude felt the temperature rise immediately in her cheeks, and her eyes widened in shock. She stood up and walked over to Scott. She placed her hand over his phone, which instantly got his attention, and he finally met her gaze for the first time this evening. Without a word, Jude pointed in the direction of the nicely adorned table. Scott looked around the room and took in the decadent entrees and the freshly picked flower centerpiece. He turned and locked eyes with Jude. His devilishly handsome face was illuminated by the candlelight, and Jude felt her heart skip a beat when his award-winning smile lovingly formed across his face. He enveloped her into a warm hug and kissed the top of her head. "Darling, you went to all this trouble for me?" "Of course I did, Scott. You have been working so hard lately, and we've barely had any time together. I was so excited when you told me that you had some big news to tell me." Scott took her face in his hands and gave her a soft kiss on the lips. Jude blushed and grinned affectionately back at him. She truly believed that she was only minutes away from the moment that she had been dreaming about since she was a little girl. Then Jude's heart rate quickened as she watched Scott reach into his pocket. "Yes, my love, I was going to wait until after dinner, but how can I make you wait any longer? Here, this is for you." To Jude's disappointment, it was not a ring after all. She took the small business card from Scott's hand and turned it over to see what it said. It had Scott's name at the top along with his firm, but what stunned Jude was the new address listed below it. "I don't understand. Why is there a New York City address listed on your business card, Scott?" Scott smiled broadly and replied, "It finally happened, sweetheart. My big break. The partners want me to move to their main headquarters in the city. We're moving to the Big Apple, Jude. Isn't this fantastic news?" Jude's palms began to sweat profusely, and she felt her anxiety rising fast within her. She collapsed into the nearest chair and took a few deep breaths. Before Jude could answer Scott, his phone started ringing again. "Now, honey, I know this is very exciting news, and I'm sure you can't wait to congratulate me. But this is my boss calling. I will be down soon so we can celebrate my great success." And with that, he disappeared, leaving Jude all alone at the table. But now the food was no longer warm, but it didn't matter to Jude anymore. She had suddenly lost her appetite. Jude sat there trying to sort out her thoughts and figure out what she would say to Scott when he would eventually come back down. She waited for 2 hours, but he still hadn't emerged from his work yet. Jude suddenly felt overcome with anger and frustration. So she slammed her hand down hard on the table. It hurt like hell, but she didn't care as her anger was boiling over inside. She didn't know how, but she felt like she had just been slapped awake and decided that enough was enough. Either he loved her or he didn't, and she was bent on finding out definitively tonight. Jude marched up the steps and thrust open the door to her bedroom. There was Scott sitting at her desk typing away like a possessed workaholic, who again didn't bother to look up when she entered. Jude took a deep breath to calm her nerves. "Scott?" she said quite louder than she had intended. He looked up at her with a confused expression on his face, almost as if he was wondering how she had gotten into the room. "Scott, we have been together now for 10 years. I have always been supportive of you and your career aspirations. But moving to New York? My home is here in Point Pleasant. My family needs me right now. I know you understand that." He leaned back in the chair and stroked his chin for a moment, contemplating Jude's words. He sighed and nodded in agreement. Jude felt relieved and suddenly braver by his agreeable demeanor. "So will you please stay here with me?" To her surprise, Scott began to laugh. Jude's confidence began to shrink and her cheeks turned bright red. She wanted to run away and hide from her embarrassment. After a couple of minutes, Scott noticed her complexion and stopped laughing. "Oh, you're serious? Jude, I know you're big on family and all, but I have to go to New York. This is the opportunity I have been working towards and waiting for my entire career. I am definitely not staying here, but I do hope that you will take some time to reconsider my offer to come with me." Scott went back to his work and Jude stood there in a daze. She didn't move from her spot for a while. Finally, she felt it was best to just leave the room so he could work in peace. But when she reached the door, she paused. A small flicker of confidence re-entered her mind, and she turned back to look at Scott. "I'm not coming with you. I won't leave my home. I guess it's over between us." Jude held her breath and secretly hoped that the last part would evoke Scott's emotions to make him reconsider giving up their relationship. "We've been together for so long. I know he loves me even if he doesn't always show it. He doesn't want to lose me." Although Jude tried to reassure herself, she was shocked when Scott simply shrugged and went back to typing on his computer. Jude could no longer hold back the waterworks, and the tears began falling faster and faster down her cheeks. She stepped out of her bedroom and reluctantly shut the door.